Hello girls. So today we have come to the last part of the chapter we were dealing with in the last two classes, that is Macbeth, one of the very famous dramas of the most important literary figure of English literature, William Shakespeare. I hope you remember the story so far. Let us little bit revise ourselves, okay? Then we will proceed to the last and concluding portion of Macbeth. So girls, we have seen that Macbeth and Banquo were returning from the battlefield, and there they met three unnatural characters, unearthly characters, the witches, and according to their prefaces, their predictions, Macbeth would become Thane of Cawdor. Subsequently, he would become the King of Scotland. And we have seen with a series of incidents, series of confrontations and conflicts, ultimately and eventually, Macbeth became the King of Scotland. And just later on in the drama, we have also seen that Banquo was murdered because he was never to become a king according to the prediction of one of the witches. But his successor, his son, would become the King of Scotland. So we have seen that according to that prediction, Fleance had just managed to escape from the murder scene where Banquo was murdered by one of the assassins sent by Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And after this, we have also seen that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth lost their sleep forever. They could not sleep because there was no peace in their lives. Though they have become the King and Queen of Scotland, their peace was no more with them. Their sleep was no more with them. And so Macbeth, at this very point of time, wanted to know his future, whatever is there in his future, from those supernatural elements, the unearthly creatures. So he decided to go on to that very place where he may find those three characters, and he may ask about his own future. Okay? And I will show you a picture of that where those three characters, unearthly creatures, are seen to do some very mysterious activity. And we have, in the last class, we have seen that they were mixing some very, ominous parts of several animals and insects and birds. And they were all boiling in a huge cauldron. That picture I'm going to show you now. So this is it. You can see the three unearthly characters, and see behind Macbeth is standing and watching that something very wrong and something very unholy and ominous is going on. And in the huge cauldron, you can see smoke is coming out, and all the very unholy elements of different parts and organs of different animals and birds and insects are being boiled in that huge cauldron. And here he came to these characters and he asked, say, what is there more for me in the future? So we have seen that one of the characters warns him that he should be aware of the Thane of Fife. And who is that Thane of Fife? His name is Macduff. And from here, we will proceed further on in the text. So just to refresh ourselves, I will just go through the previous last, paragraph, Macbeth demanded to know from them whether he would have his doubts resolved by them or by their masters, the spirits. He was not daunted by the ceremonies that he saw and boldly said, "Where are they? Let me see them." So they called the spirits. There were 3 of them. The first one looked like an armed head, called Macbeth by name and told him, "Beware of the Thane of Fife." Macbeth thanked him for the caution. He was envious of Macduff, the Thane of Fife. So up till this, we had dealt with in the last class. Now let us move on. The second spirit rose in the likeness of a bloody child. So you can see, girls, these are so very unholy and, very much scary also, right? He called Macbeth by name and told him to have no fear of death, but to laugh and scorn at the power of man, born naturally, born of a woman's womb. He advised him to be bold, bloody, and resolute. "Then live, Macduff," remarked the king. "What need do I fear of you, Macduff? But I will make assurance doubly sure. You will not live so that I can tell the pale-hearted fear that it lies and sleep in spite of thunder." So here, in this prediction of the witch, Macbeth was very much sure and confident that he was not going to die, and he does not have to fear Macduff, because he cannot be dead or he cannot be killed by someone who is not naturally born of his mother's womb. So here I would like just give you a sort of short explanation about this. See, here you should know something, that a person who is born out of a mother's womb but born not naturally out of a mother's womb means he or she has to be a premature baby. That means he or she has to come out of the mother's womb untimely. Okay? That is not being born naturally of a mother's womb. So here, these are called equivocations. Okay? That means some statement that bear 2 meanings. One will understand a meaning and the other person will find out the inner meaning. Okay, but Macbeth was so very, not in his self, that he mistook or misunderstood this statement. And he became very much confident that he's not going to die for Macduff. A spirit arose in the form of a crowned child, with a tree in his hand. He also called Macbeth by name, comforted him against conspiracies, and told him that he could never be vanquished until the woods of Birnam to Dunsinane Hill would come against him. Another equivocation. So here the spirit told him that he should not be scared. He should not fear anything until the woods move, right? Birnam forest would move to Dunsinane Hill. Can this be possible, girls? I hope not, right? Let us see what is there in store for us in the drama. Who can unfix the forest and move it from its earthbound roots? See the overconfidence of the king, Macbeth. He says, "Can anybody move a forest? What are you saying? I see I shall live the usual period of man's life and not to be cut off by a violent death. But my heart throbs to know one thing. Tell me, if you can tell me so much, if Banquo's issue shall ever reign in this kingdom." Then the real thing that Macbeth was aware, very much worried about, he wanted to be aware of that thing. And what is that? Whether Banquo's son, Fleance, would be the next king after him. This was the question going on in his mind. Let us find out the answer. Here the cauldron sank into the ground and a noise of music was heard. And 8 shadows like kings passed by Macbeth. And Banquo was the last figure. See, you can well understand, girls, if a person commits a crime, the crime will not leave that person. He will keep on remembering the thing as to what he has done. Okay? all smeared with blood. Macbeth was seeing the ghost of Banquo a number of times because he well knows what crime he had committed. And smiled at Macbeth. Banquo bore a glass which showed the figure of many more and pointed to the images. Macbeth realized that these were the posterity of Banquo who should reign after him in Scotland. Then he understood that he was seeing the shadows of the figures of the people who were to reign as a king in Scotland. The three witches danced with the sound of soft music, and making a show of duty and welcome to Macbeth, vanished in the air. And such was the circumstance around Macbeth that Macbeth was encircled with a number of worries. The first news that Macbeth got soon after coming out of the witches' cave was that Macduff the Thane of Fife had fled to England to join the army which was formed against him under the leadership of Malcolm to displace Macbeth and set Malcolm, the right heir, upon the throne of Scotland. So stung with rage, Macbeth set upon the castle of Macduff, and here another crime was committed by Macbeth. It was a grave crime once again. See, a person when does a wrong thing or commits a crime, to support that or to hide that from other people, he goes on with a series of crimes. And once again we see the same thing in the case of Macbeth also. He commits another crime, and that is, it was a merciless crime. And what was that? Let us see. Macduff's wife and children, whom the Thane had left behind in Scotland, were brutally slaughtered. Can you think of this? A person slaughtering children and a woman? Because that was the family of Macduff. Macbeth wanted to give a heavy blow to Macduff. But this was really so much terrible that Macbeth could not understand, could not just realize the after effect of this. Many fled to join Malcolm and Macduff, who were now approaching with a powerful army which had been raised in England. And the rest secretly wished success to the arms for fear of Macbeth, that they could not take active part. Everybody hated Macbeth, the tyrant. So now you see, as a Cawdor of Glamis, as a Glamis of Cawdor and Thane of Glamis, he was a very gentle person. He was a great soldier. But now as a king, he had become a tyrant, and nobody used to love him anymore. Nobody honored him, but all suspected him of. He began to envy the condition of Duncan, who now slept soundly in his grave, and against whom treason had done its worst. Neither steel nor poison, domestic malice or foreign levies could hurt him any longer. So now at this point of time, we see that Macbeth was jealous of King Duncan, whom he had himself murdered, because King Duncan was at peace now, and Macbeth had lost all his peace. Meanwhile, the queen, who had been the sole partner in his wickedness, on whose bosom he could sometimes seek a momentary repose from those terrible dreams which affected them both, passed away. And now the terrible woman, the most villainous character in this drama, Lady Macbeth, passed away because she could not bear the consequences of murdering the king. She had lost her sleep, she had lost all her peace in life, so she committed suicide. Unable to bear the remorse of guilt, and as she suffered from somnambulism, she ultimately committed suicide. Macbeth was left alone. He grew careless of life and longed for death. Now see, Macbeth didn't want to live further. He wanted death. The new approach of Malcolm's army roused in him what remained of his ancient courage, and he was determined to die with armor. The hollow promises of the three witches had also filled in him a kind false confidence, and remembered the prophecies of the spirits that no one born of a woman's womb could kill him. Now once again, Macbeth thought that no, I cannot die now. Though I want to die, but I cannot be killed, or I cannot be murdered by someone who is naturally born out of a mother's womb. So who is going to kill me? He was simply overconfident. He also believed in the soothsaying that he could never be vanquished until Birnam Woods would come to Dunsinane, which he thought was impossible. This was once again an impossible activity that was going to happen in reality. But Macbeth was so overconfident, he could never realize that if the previous predictions could have been in reality, then these predictions are also going to be real. He also believed, so she shut himself up in his own castle, which was thought to be absolutely impregnable, and waited for Malcolm to invade it. So he did have the confidence that he was not going to be killed or murdered by somebody, naturally born of a mother's womb. But still, he feared. He was terrified that maybe somebody is there who is going to kill him. So he shut himself in the, inside the strong walls of his own castle. Finally, a day came when a messenger approached him, pale and trembling with fear. Almost unable to report to Macbeth of what had seen, and yet averred that as he stood on the hill for his watch, he chanced to see the Birnam and perceived the woods to be moving. This was really very impossible, a scene to be seen, right? Liar, wrote Macbeth. Macbeth was terribly in anger. He said that this cannot be true. You are lying to me. If you speak false, you will be hanged alive upon the next tree till famine ends your life. See the cruel and brutal words of a king, as he was terribly terrified and petrified. By now, Macbeth had begun to doubt the equivocal sayings of the three spirits. As I told you, these were all equivocal sayings. That means they did have double meanings that Macbeth could not realize in the beginning. He never feared of being vanquished till Birnam Woods would advance towards Dunsinane, and now the woods did move. Now this was predictable, but this was not at all expected by Macbeth, right? So now that the woods was moving, now what? What next in the life of Macbeth? Let us find out. However, said Macbeth, if this which he vouches be true, let us take arms and move out. Now, after all, he was a soldier. The self of the soldier was awakened. Here we see, and he says, let us fight as an army. Let us be out with our swords. There is no fleeing from hence, nor staying in here. He was brave also. At the same time, he was worrying also for himself. I begin to weary of the sun and wish my life is at an end. And at some point of time, we see that Macbeth was losing his confidence. Saying these, he sallied forth upon the besiegers who had now reached the castle. The enemy was straight heading towards his castle. The strange sight of the moving woods was easily solved. That was really a very amazing sight, unexpected and impossible a sight, but it was true. How can a forest move? Let us see how it was moving. See, the plot as designed by William Shakespeare is beyond our imagination. He designed the plot in such a way that we, the readers, have to keep our patience and have to keep our interest also. What is next? What is next? Right? let us find out how the woods was moving. Army advanced towards the castle through the woods of Birnam. Malcolm, like an astute general, instructed all his soldiers to hew down a bough and bear it before him so that he could conceal the actual number of invaders to Macbeth. How very intelligent Malcolm was as a leader. What he said? He said, everyone of his army, every soldier of his army, to hold one bough or one branch of a tree in front of them and move forward like an army. In this way, the enemy camp would think that the woods was moving as a whole. How very interesting, isn't it? This marching of soldiers with bows in their hands had appeared from a distance like moving woods, and the messenger was evidently frightened. Thus the words of the spirits brought to pass, in a sense different from that in which Macbeth understood, and so he lost his confidence. Now, as I had told you that all these were equivocal sayings, equivocations, yes, the woods was to move, but how this was to be realized. That prediction came to be true. A fierce skirmish took place in which Macbeth slaughtered all those who challenged him until he faced Macduff. And remembering the caution of the spirit who had counselled him to stay away from the Thane of Fife, he would have turned back that Macduff, who had been seeking him through the whole fight, opposed his turning. And a fierce contest ensued. So Macbeth was just in front of his fearful enemy Macduff. But once again, Macbeth tried to, avert from all this, and he tried to persuade himself that I cannot be, killed by a man naturally born out of a mother's womb, Macduff reproached him and called him a tyrant, murderer, hellhound, and a villain for brutally slaughtering his wife and his innocent children. And yes, Macbeth did that crime that we have seen. Okay, so he was really very much avengeful. Then Macbeth remembered the words of the spirit and boldly proclaimed, I bear a charmed life, which must not yield to a man born naturally of a woman. At this, Macduff snubbed him and declared that never born of a woman, never as the ordinary man is naturally born, but was untimely taken out from his mother's womb. So as I had told you girls that yes, naturally born of a mother's, every child is naturally born of a mother's womb, but it can be unnatural if he or she is taken out from the mother's womb before the time. Okay, that means it has to be a premature birth. So Macduff was a premature baby. Now, at this point of time, we see that Macbeth was finished. He was completely finished. He could not say a word. He stood speechless because he could never imagine that Macduff was the person who was standing just in front of him, and he was the only person that would be responsible for his death. Macbeth lost his strength and resoluteness. He lamented, in future, a man should never believe the lying equivocations of witches and juggling spirits who deceive us in words that have double meanings. Equivocal sayings, okay? Those words which have double meanings. And while they keep their promises literally, they disappoint us by providing different meanings. He then refused to fight against Macduff. Macduff, who avowed him, scornfully told him that they would imprison him and demonstrate him to the laity as a tyrant, quite like the way monsters are displayed. So now see, what is the fortune, rather to say, what is the fate of Macbeth, who had severe and terrible ambition of becoming the King of Scotland. He did become the King of Scotland, but did he have peace? Not really. And now, just look at his fate. He will be in the prison like monsters are kept in the cells behind the bars, and people will look at him like we see the monsters behind the bars. Never, said Macbeth. I will not live to kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet. His valiance returned with despair, and he threw upon Macduff, who after a vicious struggle overpowered him and severed his head and presented it to the young and lawful new king. Now Macbeth was killed and murdered after a terrible struggle between Macduff and Macbeth. This was the ultimate fate of Macbeth. Malcolm then ascended the throne amid acclamations of the noblemen and the people of Scotland. So, this is the drama Macbeth. Girls, I hope you have understood the whole story of this drama, and I am very sure and confident that you have liked it very much. Thank you, and that's all.